As many of you know, I love to walk. It's my major form of exercise. A little slower these days after my knee replacement, but it's coming back. One of the most transformative experiences of my life was certainly 2 years ago when Jeannie and I walked the Camino de Santiago, 450 miles in 28 days from Lisbon, Portugal to Santiago, Spain. It was a pilgrimage that taught me many lessons about life and love, about God and about myself. And even though I've done a fair amount of backpacking over the years and hiking, I was reminded once again, just 1 or 2 days into our journey, of how important it is to pack light. Initially, I was carrying way too much. After a couple of days, I began asking myself what was really essential to carry. So I lightened my load and tried to carry with me only that which was necessary, not being weighed down with items that were actually unnecessary. It made the walk much easier and more enjoyable, especially on the challenging segments of terrain that we were to traverse. As we prepared for our Camino, we mapped out our journey. We knew each day that we needed to walk about 17 miles or so, some days more, some days less, in order to get to our desired destination for the night. Now, we had to hold tightly to that schedule to make sure that we arrived at the lodging that we had already reserved. Sometimes this need to get to our destination became our main focus on our walk and took away from experiencing some of the joy along the way. It got me thinking about how we map out our life and what is our most desired destination. Do we sometimes get so focused on the destination that we don't actually enjoy the journey we're on? Well, what is our destination? Could it actually be our very own hunger for God? On the Camino, we had numerous markers and guides to keep us on the path. We had maps. I had a GPS app on my phone. And there were shell markers, and there were people to give us direction. In our fast-paced and sometimes very materialistic world, it's easy to become weighed down by possessions, obligations, and distractions. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us that more is better, that we need to acquire more things in order to be happy and successful, that we must always be climbing higher on the ladders of achievement. We already know in our hearts and souls the truth that real happiness and fulfillment come not from accumulating possessions or being the most accomplished person in our field, but from freeing ourselves from them. We must learn to travel light through life, unburdened by the unnecessary baggage and expectations of others and sometimes of ourselves that weigh us down. Jesus himself spoke about the importance of traveling light. He told his disciples to take nothing with them on their journey, trusting instead in the very provision of God. Jesus knew that there were many things that we want to carry along our journey that can weigh us down and distract us. Everything from material possessions to jealousy and shame and egos and bitterness, an unforgiving spirit and anger, just to name a few. All of these things can distract us from our true purpose and from experiencing the joy and the beauty of life. These things can prevent us from journeying through life on a path to the deep beauty and joy that God created for each of us to have and experience. Now, the context of the psalm that I read a little bit ago, Psalm 42, is a lament that most likely was written during a time when the nation of Israel was facing political turmoil and exile. And the intended audience seems to be the Israelites who were longing for their homeland and struggling with their faith. The psalm clearly reflects the writer's emotional state of feelings of loneliness and hopelessness and a deep yearning for something beyond himself. In Psalm 42:1, the psalmist laments, "As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God." Just like the psalmist, our deep longing and thirst for God is not a weakness to be ignored or suppressed, but rather it is an invitation to dive deeper into the mystery of God's ever-present love, to be hydrated by this love of God deep in our souls. Just as a traveler in a foreign land longs for home, just as the Jews who were exiled and suffering at the time the psalmist writes these words, there are times in our lives when life is challenging when the path is not clear, when we wonder where God is. There are times in our lives when our souls yearn for something, someone beyond ourselves, longing for the comforting presence of God, a comfort that is actually tangible. On the hottest day of our Camino, it was at least 98 degrees, and we were walking about 20 miles that day. My ankle was a bit swollen from a fall I took a few days before, and my knees ached. It was a day when we were on the Atlantic coast of Portugal, walking along long stretches of an asphalt highway, mile after mile. It seemed there was no shade. I'd not drunk enough water. I was feeling weak, exhausted, and like I could not take another step. It was one of the rare moments on our Camino where I was wondering myself, what was I doing this for? What was the purpose of all this? As we journey through our life, we hit those moments. What is it that we're longing for? What is it that we're thirsting for deep, deep in our soul? In Psalm 42:8, during the difficult circumstances and questions that these people are facing, the writer declares, "By day the Lord commands his steadfast love, and at night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life." In our most difficult seasons and moments in life, it's equally important and powerful for us to be reminded of the promises of God, of the very faithfulness of God. This is what gives us the strength and hope to face all that we're going through. Staying focused on that which hydrates us, that which guides us towards the source of all life and love. In the simplicity and humility of traveling light, it is there that we rediscover God's richness and God's abundant grace. This grace is the foundational experience of God. It is both the starting point of our journey, our relationship with God, and it is the very thing that keeps even mature Christians sustained on the various terrains of our faith. Maybe grace is both the beginning and the destination itself. Grace is like being met with a hug when you're expected to be locked out of the house. It's like being told you're forgiven when you know the thing you did was totally unforgivable. It's like being crushed with debt and living paycheck to paycheck only to be told that you no longer owe anything. Grace is like all that and more. Over the centuries, much has been written by theologians and biblical scholars trying to capture the breadth and depth of grace, and yet it all falls short of this gift of God that is limitless. One thing is for sure, the experience of this embracing, forgiving, debt-relieving love and grace is where the Christian journey in traveling light actually begins. So how can we learn to travel light through life? We must start by examining our priorities and letting go of anything that doesn't serve our highest good. I guess you could say that in some ways we have to make room for grace in our lives. This may mean simplifying our living spaces, decluttering our minds, releasing attachments to certain material possessions. We must also learn to trust in God's wisdom that guides us, knowing that we will be provided for. By not holding too tightly to what we have mapped out for our journey, by relinquishing our need for control, we open ourselves up to new opportunities and experiences that can enrich us in ways that we've never imagined. Traveling light through life is not always easy. It requires courage and faith and a willingness to let go of the familiar in order to embrace the unknown. But I can assure you that the rewards will certainly outweigh the challenges. When we travel light, we are allowing ourselves to live in harmony with the natural rhythms of creation and our Creator. We learn not to carry the weight of hatred and prejudice. We see people on our path as fellow sojourners, not obstacles or inconveniences. We see all people, even our enemies, as people loved by and created in the image of God. And that alone can radically change how we move forward on our journey. We all possess a deep longing and thirst for God. It is a hunger of the soul, a desire for something greater than ourselves, a craving for the unconditional love and grace that only God can provide. This longing is a gift, a reminder that we are created for something more profound and meaningful than what the world offers us or that we can muster up on our own. In our quest for fulfillment, we must learn to release the heavy burdens that weigh us down, the pressures to conform, the fears of inadequacy, the attachments to possessions and status. We must allow God to strip away the layers of self-doubt and embrace our true identity as a beloved child of God, worthy of this love and acceptance just as we are. Only then can we truly experience the lightness and the freedom that comes from walking in this way of love. Traveling light through life requires us to let go of our need for control and certainty and to trust God's guidance to lead us on this path. It means embracing a spirit of humility and compassion and service to others. It means living in alignment with the values of love and justice and peace that reflect the kingdom of God here on earth. It is realizing now that our destination is not just the hereafter. Part of understanding our faith journey is to embrace that the destination is more about our relationships than about arriving in a specific physical place in our life. As we journey through the ups and downs of life, we're often faced with difficult questions and challenges that can shake our faith to its core. We may find ourselves grappling with the age-old question, where is God in the face of suffering, pain, and adversity? But it can be in these moments of darkness and doubt that our deep longing and thirst for God are most keenly felt. The reality is that life is not always easy. We encounter situations that can leave us feeling lost and abandoned, questioning the very presence of God in our life and in our world. As a pastor, I see it all the time in people's lives. And there are plenty of seasons of my own life where I have felt abandoned, lost, and wondered, where are you, God? And when faced with the disappointment and the harsh realities of illness and loss, injustice and violence, it is natural to wonder why God seems silent or distant in the midst of our struggles, just like the psalmist, crying out, lamenting along with the psalmist, where are you, God? But it is precisely in these moments of doubt and questioning, when we feel our faith is truly being tested, that we can be reminded that God is not distant. God is not an indifferent deity, but a loving and compassionate presence that walks with us through the darkest valleys. Even when we don't feel God's presence, God is still there. It is in the stillness of our suffering that we may actually come to encounter God's presence in a profound way. Encounter God's grace, His comfort, His faithfulness, and strength in new and unexpected ways. Traveling light through life does not mean evading the difficult questions or glossing over the pain and hardships we face. It means carrying our burdens with a spirit of hope, of trust and resilience, knowing that God's love and grace are ever present, even in the midst of our greatest challenges. It means leaning into our faith and seeking consolation in the community of believers who can offer support, comfort, and solidarity with us on the journey. When we wrestle with the difficult questions of where God is in the face of suffering, we're invited to look to the life of Jesus, who himself experienced profound pain and anguish on the cross. From the cross he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It is through his example of unwavering faith and compassion, through his example of unconditional love and grace, that we find comfort and reassurance in knowing that God is intimately acquainted with our human struggles and is always present, even in our darkest hours. Amen.